I've managed to get through the 70s without. I'm not walking with a limp. I managed to get through the 70s. They're not over yet.
We're about to win.
New Year's Eve actually be a little more appropriate for that.
In the 70s, people sort of got. In the early 70s, I turned away from music completely. After, because I had rock and rolls bands in the 60s and the Who were around and everything, and I completely turned away from it, went into theater and stuff, because I got real sick of it, because people talking about, it wasn't rock and roll anymore.
It feels to me like the 70s were the me decade,
Right.
How I feel, what's best for me, my space, my time, the 60s always seemed like they were more concerned with causes of a bigger nature, of group energies.
I would say the smartest people of the 70s got their influences from decades gone by when they realized that nothing really was happening in the 70s. And here at the end of the 70s, everyone's raving about Knack and Cars and all these groups that sound like the early 60s. If that's moving forward, we could have skipped this last 10.
I think that they got burned out on all the poetry and, folk rock music of the early 70s, so now they don't want to hear any social statements or anything provocative. They just want to hear about, getting their nut, dancing.
There really wasn't an overriding, I don't think there really was an overriding voice that came at the beginning of the decade and lasted through the end of the decade.
60s had groups that were kind of self-contained. The music was simple enough that 4 and 5 pieces could do it. And then towards the very end of the 70s, you got the idea that groups were self-contained again. They could go out and travel, 5-piece bands, no heavy producers. 70s had tons of production, overproduced, too many strings, horns, conductors. It was a producer's album, producer's world.
There hasn't been any one thing that's been particularly influential. Maybe that's what's been missing in the 70s, everyone's been looking for something that means something and has as much aesthetic impact or sociological impact as, say, the music of the 60s did.
The guts of the 60s sort of gave way to a more like soft country rock thing that I had a real hard time with it.
At the end of this decade, music is as healthy as it was at the end of the 60s. It's very strong, a lot of new young bands, a lot of new ideas, and seems to be a lot happening, but I think there was a middle period which was a bit directionless and which was kicked into gear again by the punk and new wave.
A record becomes popular here according to who you know. Full stop.
Rock and roll's always been like Teen Angel, and car crashes and, fires and, beer, and all,
There will always be someone to fulfill whatever, desires or whatever a young person has.
What I'm trying to do is as important as, say, what Frank Sinatra was doing 10 years ago, and even what Frank Sinatra's doing now. And I think it's as important as, say, what Elvis Presley was trying to do before he died. And that is just, literally, it's your life, it's your career. My life, I hope I'm performing when I'm 100.
But the real feeling of rock and roll, of just really going out and having a really good time and dancing and everything, it became a bit too sophisticated with a lot of bands.
I'm not a musical snob. I never have been.
Yeah.
People always say, this kind of music, that kind of music. To me, it's either good or bad, and that's the only criterion I hold for what I like.
Right.
It's either good or bad. I can like the Eagles, I can like the Sex Pistols. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's all just down to the music.
The 70s were almost like getting over the 60s, and now we're into the 80s, and there's room to breathe again.
Whereas I say myself, the Beatles and Elvis, we were right at the beginning of things. So it was inevitable that whatever we did would have some influence. Rock and roll has now established a format. It's established respectability. People can't say, oh, it's a load of rubbish, anybody can play it, because it's not a load of rubbish and not everybody can play it.
It's not really anything to be proud of. Compared to the fine arts, ballet dancers, actors, painters, they wait all their lives to get a break. Rock and roll, 1 hit and you're a star. 2 hits, you're a mega star already.
Yeah, for us, it was very much like we were like baked beans.
Right.
We were just sort of stuck in a package and...
They all sold out. They all copped out for the easy buck. Sickness.
Who had the influences in the 70s, like, say, the Beatles had in the 60s and Dylan? Who would you personally name as the people, all groups that had the big influences on the 70s
Oh, I actually
music?
think Sharon John, without a doubt.
Yeah?
Sharon, yeah.
You mean
they
Meldrum?
are a huge influence over everybody.
Right.
Would you agree, chaps? Sharon?
Anyone else? Anyone else?
No, that's about it.
Yeah?
Elton's about it, I think.
What about, say, someone like Bowie?
No, not in Elton's category, I don't think.